I think we've had a number of perfect setups for this little mini panel. We're going to be pretty quick here. But Clay, of course, did a fantastic job talking about Wikipedia as a plan B and this idea that the greatest resource is the community and, of course, your ability to change your mind. So it turns out that that whole philosophy that Clay expressed with such grace and such skill has a playbook, and it's called the Lean Startup. And as David said, Eric has been the person to sort of crystallize this for this community, famously talking about an utter failure in a startup that he was doing. So maybe you can just give people, Eric, a brief overview of what you mean when you say Lean Startup.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm a big failure. As you just heard. And if you follow me, you can be a big failure, too. So who's with me? Who's excited? Yeah, OK. Thank you. Oh, it's so great to be in front of a friendly audience where failure is not a four-letter word. I'm sure, of course, you're talking about your friend's failure, not yours. I understand. So Lean Startup is a playbook that your friend may find helpful. And it's very simple, actually. It takes a lot of the ideas that Clay was talking about, that we know for sure that our original idea is not going to be correct, that we're going to have to fail on the way to success. And says, let's actually take that idea seriously, and let's borrow ideas from the entrepreneurial community, that's the startup part, but also from the best in management thinking, that's the lean part, those of you who know lean manufacturing. And says, if we know for sure that we're going to fail, if we know that the way we should measure progress is learning, then let's use science and rapid experimentation to deal with that uncertainty. So this is a management system for situations of high uncertainty, where we do a process we call build, measure, learn, an iterative process that tries to figure out, okay, as we experiment, as we learn, are we on track? Is our strategy really working? Or is it time to use our most famous management jargon term, the pivot? That's my fault, so hi, everybody. I'm also a failure and also responsible for the pivot. But it's a very important concept. A pivot is a change in strategy without a change in vision. So we were joking backstage when Clay said, hey, just plan harder is not going to work, but also a hackathon is not going to solve your problems. We were joking there must be somebody in the room who's like, damn it, those are only two tools in my toolkit. Now, what am I supposed to do if neither of them work? So Lean Startup is an alternate tool, which is to say, let us be committed to a long-term, large vision, but acknowledge that there's a possibility that our first strategy might not be the right one, and let's systematically try to figure out what are the assumptions behind that strategy that were wrong so that we can find a new one. And the faster we can run those experiments, then the faster we can learn. Therefore, the more likely it is we get to a solution that actually works. And that's Lean Startup in a nutshell.
But it only works for startups.
We get that a lot, yes.
Okay.
But certainly not true. Yeah, thank you. It's actually very interesting. My background is as a tech entrepreneur here in Silicon Valley. So when I first started working on Lean Startup, that's what I was interested in solving that problem. And it just so happened that I was using a definition of a startup that felt right to me, which is a human institution designed to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty. So you can kind of see from that, my belief, entrepreneurship is the management discipline that deals with high uncertainty. And there's nothing in that definition about sector, size of company, about industry. It just says, if you don't know what's going to work, then you are an entrepreneur, really no matter what it says on your business card. And when I started speaking about that, and Jen organized one of the first big talks I gave on the subject, people came up to me afterwards and said, okay, I accept your challenge. And I was like, what challenge? And I was talking about it. And they're like, well, you said this can work in my giant organization. Let's go put it to the test. And at first I was like, that's really not my problem. Good luck with that. But I don't know anything about politics and organizational structure and working in a large. And they're like, I'm sorry, you didn't hear me. I'm a manager in a big I got politics covered. I'm good at that. I know how to get my team and my budget. I can deal with that stuff. But when I get my team in a room to do something fundamentally new, what exactly are they supposed to do every day? And I was like, oh, I think I know something about that. So since then, I've had the chance to work with all kinds of very strange organizations, like huge companies like GE and Toyota. Tim and Jen have had me on all kinds of civic places I've never been, like the Pentagon and the CFPB and federal government. And what we find, when we go into all those places, as you all know, is that there are entrepreneurs everywhere. And I don't mean that like a metaphor. There's someone who's like an entrepreneur. When I meet the actual people that get work done, like you just saw, they are every bit the entrepreneur as much as the kids down the street here in Silicon Valley. And so what we want to do is actually say, well, what would it be like if we had a management system, a process around those people, then instead of tying two hands behind their back and saying, now go fight, we said, what if you actually had a process that got out of your way, that supported you and when you talk to actual entrepreneurs inside organizations about that, they're like, is that even possible? Because to them, process management, those are dirty words that just mean people who get in my way. But we think there's a better way. And so, Lean Startup has become a movement of people who are trying to clear out those obstacles and support our innovators, no matter where they live.
Absolutely. So, Nigel, I know the Lean always calls up small budgets, which a lot of people working in city governments actually have. But it also is this notion, again, borrowing from the Lean Startup book, as a machine for learning. So obviously, from what we just saw, there's a lot of evidence of that. Can you talk about how Boston, well, Monum, but Boston as a larger entity, you feel is becoming a machine for learning?
So one of the things a few years ago, when a bunch of us joined City Hall, we had a lot of great resources in the city, both outside City Hall, obviously, and inside City Hall. A lot of talented people. But the question of, I kind of alluded to this before, as to what do we do now, really kind of came up. And so what we hit on was, the traditional way of thinking about this from a government perspective would be the planning, right? Would be to develop some kind of 5-year strategic plan, and that still happens. It's unfortunately, in some cases it may well be appropriate. But what we found was, if we're really looking to move the needle on some of these classic urban indicators, that can't be the only way we work. And so what we started devising was a series of more kind of nimble approaches to thinking about what we did, in which we were engaging in actual experiments. And so for us, that's like a sacred word in a sense, because these aren't pilots, right? These aren't sort of like one and done projects. These are very much about, let's learn something. Let's honestly try to see if we can add value to residents, and we'll only know that is unless we try it and see if they like it. And if they don't like it, we figure out why and try to tweak it. And so then we essentially developed a set of methodologies that we subsequently read about in Eric's book, which was really fabulous, in which it was all about kind of iterative, lightweight. We ended up using the fact that budgets were also very lean to our advantage, because thinking in terms of these iterative experiments naturally brings down the cost of them and sort of the time frames and so on. And so we got quite good at it.
We've just talked a little bit about Discover BPS as sort of a lean startup and having its own set of pivots, but that actually was one that was pretty successful from the beginning. You want to call out any of the, you want to be a good failure here and talk about some stuff that didn't work?
In general?
Outside of BPS
outside
or
of
anything,
BPS.
yeah.
So we've certainly had our fair share of failures, lots of failures. One of the things that we've done is we've been doing a range of work around using smartphones to see if, thinking about smartphones as a medium in which to engage residents. And so we've done a bunch of really cool stuff that's worked really well, but there's a bunch of stuff that has just been smoking failures. And early on, when we first started down this road, we got some criticism from first rolling out on then the iPhone, the iPhone 3G back in the day, and people thought that we were being elitist. And how do these things scale to sort of downscale markets and so on? And we took that for what it's worth, but we defended our position by saying that we want to build the best of breed experience for people, so we need to start here. But we had always hoped that we could do more about sort of expanding the platforms into different directions. And so a couple of years ago, we decided, it's time to actually do this well. People are using the platform, is generating a lot of great data. People are really using it. And so we focused on developing a text-based and SMS-based interface into the system, so that rather than having to use a smartphone app, you could use any kind of feature phone to text things in. And again, we weren't sure, how people would use it. It was much easier to look at making that platform multilingual, so we were able to do that pretty quickly. And then we worked with some community organizations to test it out. Some local, as it happens, environmental justice organizations that were willing, that signed up, and they hated it. I think it worked. We did a bunch of, our initial kind of inside the government kind of testing just to make sure that technically it was sound, but then we got it out there as quickly as we could, and people just didn't want to use it. In part, when we dove into it, part of it was because they liked the Citizens Connect experience, the back and forth nature of the text. Give us your address. It was just long enough that we lost people, but we thought it was an awesome idea, and we still think it's an awesome idea, but it was a failure in terms of getting people to actually use it, and so we've kind of mothballed it.
Well, so I think we all have this problem, I think, where in the room we all sort of get like super rah-rah failure, and then we go home to our cities or organizations, and it's like, that's totally not cool. Why are you saying that this is cool? So this is a question to both of you. So how do you deal with the resistance to failure? The idea that if you start something and it doesn't work and they don't like it, it's a big black mark against you, and Monum gets less resources, or someone writes a bad article. How do you deal with this culturally? And maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. So the way that we've dealt with that is to, frankly, like to be prolific, right, and to be smart about how we invest our time and our effort. And so if we're going to be doing a bunch of things that we think are riskier and we're not sure, like the text-based interface, we make sure that we're balancing that with things that will be sure wins, right? Or that we can be reasonably confident that we can be adding value, because we do live in a political environment. And so we're always thinking about risk versus reward, but not in a way that sort of dampens our sort of entrepreneurial or innovative spirit. But we do have to be realistic about, we need to also be a good news machine as much as we are like a learning machine. And so that's simply part of the way that we have to work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and this is not just a civic phenomenon. I mean, you should see how hard managers in corporate America work to do what we call success theater, which is the work you do to make it seem like you're a success whether you are or not. And actually, if you just spend any 5 minutes with the tech press in Silicon Valley, you see we do a lot of that here, because nobody really wants to be a failure. And the problem is that the energy we put into success theater, every ounce of energy we invest in that is an ounce we could have spent serving our customers and our citizens and trying to have an impact, but we didn't. And at the executive levels of organizations, people really understand that distinction and understand that they're being sold. And so part of what we try to do in Lean Startup is to create a vocabulary around learning, to turn it into something concrete, to say, listen, it's not that we were stupid, it's that this was a complicated, uncertain problem, and look, we're making progress towards a solution. And it's funny because the same cynics will say, that'll never work, it was a bad idea. If you actually manage to find something that works, like on the third try, they'll say, well, why didn't you just do that on the first try? Like, well, yeah, if we knew to do that on the first try, it would have been our first try, but obviously we didn't know. So by creating a vocabulary and a framework around how do we demonstrate that progress objectively, we can turn, like a scientific experiment that doesn't confirm the hypothesis is not a failure. It's simply a step on the road to discovery of that final solution.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. This is the question we get most often, I think, and when people come visit Code for America, they ask, well, how do I know it's going to work? And we don't know. And we embrace
Try it,
that.
you might like it. It's a little green eggs and ham.
We don't have a lot of time, so I think I'm going to cut this off. I think we could talk about this all day. But just one other thing to sort of draw out of it, just looking at the slides that you guys showed and talking about the maker aspect of it, and then Clay talking about the hardware prototypes and all that. Again, the sister movement to the Lean Startup movement and the civic hacking movement is the maker movement, and I'm saying that partly because I am running a mini maker fair on Sunday, and this is the other thing that's occupying my mind. But I think that is an important parallel to draw out, because that's what we're doing. We're tinkering, we're making, we're playing with things. And I hope that all of you tinker and play with stuff. And also in the breaks, we're gonna end now so that you can have more time at the break. Remember, and I think you just said this, unless we're willing to share these insights and these failures, we're really not getting anywhere. So use the break to do that. And thank you guys very much.
Thank you. Thanks.